Tilbury. The blast from a 50-megaton strike on this target would cause damage as far away as Southampton, and the radiation cloud would cover most of our region. And that's just one warhead. In a full-scale attack, the government's estimate of immediate casualties, if no precautions are taken, is 40 million.
So what can people do to defend themselves? Well, the government has issued this booklet, Protect and Survive, which illustrates some precautions you can take. The heat can be partly countered by painting your windows with whitewash or boarding them up to prevent the contents from igniting. The blast by sheltering in a basement, if you have one, or making a blast-proof shell inside your house. The fallout by staying inside this shell for about 2 weeks after the initial strike, surviving on food and water you've taken inside with you. The government says this could reduce the number of casualties from 40 million to 25 million. But this document and the policy it represents has aroused criticism from across the political spectrum.
The left-wing New Statesman said its whole intention is not to ensure survival after the event, but to allay public concern before the fact.
And a spokesman for the Conservative Bow Group said, for Londoners worried about their chances of help after a nuclear attack, I have this urgent message. Buy a rabbit's foot.
The government itself is certainly not taking any chances on boarded-up windows or whitewash. In the immediate post-war attack period, central government would cease and government would depend on sub-regional control centres in secret underground shelters, proof against blast, heat and radiation. For the first time, with Home Office permission, our cameras were allowed down the sub-regional control centre for an area covering a large part of the southern region.
This will be one of the main seats of government in the event of a nuclear attack. It's nowhere near as gracious as the Mother of Parliaments. In fact, it feels more like being below decks in a submarine, with all the essential hardware of its life support systems on show. But here, isolated below ground, about 200 key government personnel, headed by a junior minister, will batten down the hatches and try to restore some form of order to the chaos which will undoubtedly reign above ground. But planning and decision-making are impossible in a vacuum. The whole operation depends on good communications. So this communications room is one of the nerve centres of the whole organisation, one of the only points of contact with the outside world. Long rows of desks, offices and equipment await the chosen few. Representatives of government departments, the emergency services and the military, who are considered essential in restoring some form of order after a nuclear attack. You may feel it was the scientists that got us into this mess in the first place, but if the worst does happen, they're certainly going to be important in sorting it out. In this room, from information like this that comes in from their warning and monitoring systems all over the region, they'll be assessing the effects of bomb blasts and the fallout conditions in the atmosphere. And from their analyses, the government will formulate a strategy. In the event of war, emergency powers would be enacted by Parliament to give control of the sub-region to one man, a junior minister, the only elected representative of government as we now know it, who'd be in charge of the civil servants. He'd operate from here at this modest desk as virtual dictator, and dictator is not too strong a word, because there'd be no democracy as we know it. This one man would control public order through the police, be in charge of the administration of justice, be responsible for the allocation of what resources remained, and in extreme circumstances have the power of life and death over those of us who survived. Rows of ticker tape machines bring news of conditions around the world, but the traffic can't just be one way. There has to be some way of letting the survivors know what's happening outside their shelters, basements and cupboards under the stairs. This is what's known as a dead room. Nothing, I hasten to add, to do with casualties. It's a room with special soundproofing for broadcasting, and it's from here that the wartime broadcast will be transmitted, giving information and instruction to the general public. When I offered my services, they explained
At the moment, the plan was that it should be manned by staff from the BBC.
In the hierarchy of government in crisis, the next tier below this is the county headquarters. This is the Dorset headquarters under the Dorchester Library. Wartime controller would be the present Chief Executive Officer, Mr. Ken Able.
Really, I was trying to get a picture of what is happening in the county, to what extent there's been damage, and to what extent there's been casualties, and to what extent the main resources of life have survived, and trying then best to allocate resources according to the need, with whatever people and so on are left to get the resources to them, which may be pretty minimal. It depends whether Dorset is the subject of a direct attack itself, or whether it's unaffected or somewhere between the two and is suffering nuclear fallout, having not been the subject of a bomb blast.
You put a great deal of emphasis on the importance of still having government after an attack. How can you actually carry government out? How can you control people from here?
Well, the resources, in a sense, are that one has got the military personnel and police supplemented by special police. But in fact, no country can survive if it just depends on dictatorial powers. The real chance of survival is that the British are law-abiding people generally and do take their turn and are not selfish and do not normally panic. And provided those things prevail, this country's got a good chance of survival.
Assuming people didn't behave in a law-abiding and responsible manner, what sanctions do you have to impose law without the court system, which obviously wouldn't exist?
Well, to say the court system wouldn't exist, I would expect government in enacting emergency legislation to empower emergency courts and give them all the powers they need, including that of the death penalty in extreme cases.
But people are being told in the Protect and Survive leaflet to sort of lean doors up against a wall, cover them in sand, whereas the government are going well underground. They must be feeling a lack of confidence when they see this happening.
Yes, I understand the apprehensions of people who see those in responsible positions in a nuclear war getting better protection than they are themselves. And that's why I think it's important to remember that those who are in those positions have their wives and families still exposed. The other consideration is this, that many communities, giving thought to their position ahead of an attack, as I hope they will do, will see that there are places nearby where they can give themselves a very good protection. They may be natural features, or they may be old but very substantial buildings, prisons and cathedrals and so on have very thick stone walls.
If the government and the politicians had no form of protection, no bolt holes, wouldn't they work more zealously towards peace and avoidance?
I think one has to credit all politicians with a complete desire for peace. But I do believe that a country that has preparedness for a nuclear attack lessens the chance of it happening.
But are preparations of this nature a viable deterrent? Well, this is what was said by one of our outstanding military leaders.
In the event of a nuclear war, there will be no chances, there will be no survivors, all will be obliterated. As a military man who has given half a century of active service, I say in all sincerity that the nuclear arms race has no military purpose. Wars cannot be fought with nuclear weapons. Their existence only adds to our perils because of the illusions which they have generated. There are powerful voices around the world who still give credence to the old Roman precept: if you desire peace, prepare for war. This is absolute nuclear nonsense.
That was the last speech of Lord Mountbatten of Burma on the 11th of May 1979, shortly before his death.
It was only recently that the extent of these preparations, and in fact the location of the underground citadels, was discovered, not by a Russian mole working deep in the heart of government, not by a political maverick or ace investigative journalist, but by an 18-year-old school leaver in Reading.
The story begins at this disused concrete bunker in Reading, once the wartime civil defence headquarters for the Berkshire area. No longer regarded as a safe refuge, in 1978 it was handed over to Reading University for use as laboratory and storage space. But during the transfer, a young man called Guy Smith received permission to go inside and look around. Smith, then aged 18, was keen to break into journalism and was working on a story about the government's civil defence plans.
I got permission to go inside to have a look around because I was doing some research into civil defence in the Reading area. And I was walking around this bunker, and it was just as it had been when it was used as the war room headquarters. And in one of the offices, there was a great big pile of rubbish, old planks, fire extinguishers, boxes of regular government-issue soap and so on. And in the corner, under this pile of rubbish, was a stack of papers about 8 inches high. And I had a look through these, and I realized there was something of interest. So I talked to the workmen who are actually clearing out all the rubbish from the bunker and putting it into skips to take it over to the dump. And I said to them, could I have a look at these? And they said, yeah, I mean, these are only going to be put in the skip, and you can have them as far as we're concerned. So I realized that I'd come across something quite interesting. And then they said, you know, you can take them if you want. So I took them. And when I got home with them, I looked through them, and I realized it was really something quite important, because on these documents, it showed all the communications links between different government bunkers, the different civil defence headquarters that would be used by the government in the event of a nuclear war.
In effect, what Smith had discovered was a complete guide to underground government headquarters throughout the country. But was he breaking the Official Secrets Act?
No, I wasn't. I was quite open about the fact that I had them. I asked whether I could take them, and it was said yes, because they'd only be thrown away. And I think it shows, even if they were secret, which they weren't, they were quite open papers. There was nothing secret. They weren't classified in any way. There was no markings on them saying confidential or anything like that. Even if they were secret, though, the fact that they can be just left in the corner of an old bunker in Reading for somebody to find shows that this system of official secrecy isn't really working, because supposing they had been very important, then the government would have looked real fools if they'd been come across by somebody who was only 18 years old at the time.
Smith took the documents to journalist Duncan Campbell, now defence correspondent of the New Statesman. What did he make of the significance of these so-called Reading papers?
The Reading papers, which Guy Smith discovered, which dealt with the close down and the build-up of the new network, showed that a new set of bunkers had been constructed up and down the country to take the place of the original regional seats of government. And that far from the whole thing closing down in 1968, as the public end of civil defence certainly did, they continued building more bunkers, more hideaways for the government.
Isn't it right, though, that the government should make sure that they are protected in the situation of sort of chaos and anarchy that would take place after a nuclear war?
The provision of this sort of network whereby the decision takers, the people with their finger on the button, can insulate themselves from what is going to happen to the rest of us, make themselves feel secure. That is the threat, you know, this chaos and anarchy. My God, you know, if these people have brought nuclear devastation to this country, who among us are not going to be anarchists? Who among us are not going to want to bring down and destroy that state which devastated this country? In cahoots, one must say, with an equally appalling state on the other side of Europe.
Well, how then do you assess the government's priorities?
Well, the government stated its priorities, in secret, of course. The planning assumptions for home defence, as it's now called, new title from civil defence, was set out in 1973 in a government circular. And I think it's very important. I have that circular. It's one that one isn't supposed to have, but it does set out the priorities in order. And priority A, 1A, our objective is to secure the United Kingdom against any internal threat. That's not the Russians, nor the Hungarians, nor the Chinese.
Many people might think that you're being a little bit paranoid in taking this attitude.
Well, I think we're all paranoid about nuclear war. None of us want it to happen, and I think it's fair to say that the government doesn't want it to happen. The question is the point at which the military and the decision takers are going to button down in their holes and decide that it may happen and they'd better look to themselves. Now, this has actually already happened. It didn't happen at the time of Cuba, curiously enough, but it has happened, and not in the context of nuclear war crisis, but in the context of disturbances in this country. Late in 1973, Edward Heath ordered that the Home Defence Network, with its bunkers, with its communication system, be activated, shortly before the onset of the real centre of the miners' strike of 1974. And in fact, the whole revival of this Home Defence, formerly Civil Defence Network, goes back to the time of the miners' strike in 1972. And it was then that the Civil Contingencies Unit in the Cabinet Office was set up. That's a unit which cooperates with the part of the Home Office which runs the bunkers.
What is the prime reason for these bunkers? A document which has reached People Rule gives further substance to Campbell's claim that the government are more concerned with the threat of insurrection than external aggression. In October 1978, the Home Office held a civil defence exercise, codenamed Scrum Half. On the third day of the 10-day exercise, instructions were issued from Army Command, Southeastern District at Aldershot, to all platoon strength units in the area to authorize the use of CS gas grenades, guns and riot equipment. As such weaponry would be of little use against the Russians, their only purpose could be the control of the civilian population.
I think the government do think that if the public find out that there are all these secret bunkers for government officials and for civil servants, and yet the ordinary man in the street is being told to put sandbags around his kitchen table and live under that for 14 days, I think that the government are going to start worrying that people might be not terribly satisfied about the way civil defence is being run in this country.
The risk is that while we are protecting and surviving by covering ourselves underneath tables with sacks of earth, they are in a very much better position, not feeling the threat. The danger is that they will come in their insulated bunkers to disregard the consequences of escalating a nuclear war or escalating a crisis. And that means annihilation.
There's been growing pressure from both sides of the House for the government to come clean on its civil defence policy. The Minister of State at the Home Office, Leon Britton, has talked to Veronica Charlwood about the government's attitude.
Minister, how could the public have confidence in a government that is providing secure shelter for its senior civil servants, the government itself, and not for the general population?
That isn't quite the correct picture of what the government is doing. Anyone could think from the way you put it that the whole of the civil service is going to hive underground. We're talking about a very, very small number of sub-regional and regional headquarters, really absorbing a very small number of people. The vast majority of the civil service will be not in there, I can assure you. As far as the public is concerned, there are measures of protection. It's, as I've indicated, it isn't possible to provide shelters for each individual person, but it is possible for individuals to be given guidance as to steps that they can take to protect themselves, and that's being done, and the extent to which further steps can be taken is something that is being looked into.
How did these underground seats of government come to be built with what seemed to be very little public debate at the time?
I can't answer that, because that was all started long before I got into my present job. That decision was taken. The degree to which civil defence has been taken seriously has varied. It's been run down in 1968 rather badly, but at whatever time the decision was taken, it was taken on the basis of what was needed, and I wouldn't quarrel with that decision.
The impression is that one of the prime reasons for these underground seats of government is to protect against internal threat to Britain rather than to the external threat of an enemy.
That's just not correct at all. That is an impression, to be quite honest, which I hear for the first time this evening. A lot of people have said a lot of different things to me about this subject. That's not one of the things that's been said up to now, and it's quite untrue.
Well, I hope we've not depressed you too much with this look into the crystal ball at something that may never happen. But before we say goodnight, here are Soul and People's Theatre with a final and rather less serious word on the subject.
Good morning. I'd like a leaflet on how to build a nuclear fallout shelter, please.
We don't have one.
Ah, you don't have one. Well, where do I get one then?
Have you tried the town hall?
Yes, I have. They don't have one. I've tried several prominent newsagents. But then I thought the GPO, a government department, that's bound to be the right place.
Tried the public library?
No, I haven't tried the library, but they're local government, and you are a central government department. The GPO, Head of Communications. And if you yourself haven't got one, I felt sure you could tell me where to go. You've got a dog licence, have you?
Do you want a dog licence?
No, I just wondered if you were out of everything. I mean, you've got stamps, postal orders, driving licence forms, that sort of thing.
We do have stamps, we do have postal orders, we do have forms for driving licences. We do not have leaflets on nuclear fallout shelters.
Well, why is that?
Because the government has not issued them yet.
Are you sure of that?
If we had them, they'd be on the counter. There.
Well, do you know when they will be issuing them? I mean, you must be kept abreast of these things.
I don't suppose there's anything they can do, really, if it drops.
Oh, what nonsense. What a ridiculous suggestion. I mean, I am the general public. I voted this government in. You don't think they'd leave us high and dry when the bomb drops? Not at all. Well, where can I go then? I want to start building it right now. I've got the wood.
Perhaps the adult education department.
Oh, that's a good idea. Yes, I'll try that.
Good night.
Good night.